I'm going to introduce you to Adideva, and we'd like to start, Adideva, besides thanking you for coming, just to explore what was your life like before you became a devotee of Krishna? Were you into art at that time also?
Oh, yeah. No, I went to, was very influenced. My mother was an artist. She taught at a museum, and she would take me as a young boy to the museum, and I'd wander around the museum while she taught classes. And so I was exposed to art early. Later on, I went to college and majored in sculpture and ceramics. And had just graduated college and been out for a year and a half before I met the devotees. So, yeah.
So where did you grow up and where did you go to college?
I went to the University of Texas. I spent a summer in Maine, Skowhegan, Maine, studying sculpture. I studied at the studio school, the museum school in Houston before I went to UT. But yeah, I finally graduated from the University of Texas.
So this was the 1960s?
Yeah, I believe 69. Uh-huh. Yeah, at that point, I didn't really know what I was going to do, but my art career did start to take off. And I started showing in galleries and museums. But there's always that sort of itch of, you show your work or you meet all these important people or whatever, and you're wondering, okay, what else? I always had this kind of wondering about, what's life all about? What am I really supposed to be doing? Even in college, my professors would say, oh, you should go on and get a master's degree so then you can teach. Well, that was the last thing I wanted to do, is stay in a school system and teach art. I just wanted to go out and explore. And I'd met a couple of people that had gone to India, and I just thought, oh, that's like going to another planet. That's the other side of the world. I couldn't imagine ever going there. But I met some people that were involved in yoga. I had a yoga teacher. I learned some hatha yoga. And through that, I met Vishnu Janaswami.
So at that time, the devotees had a center in Austin?
They had a little rent house on the east side of Austin on Dancy Street. When you entered that house, there was no furniture. It was just bare. There was one card table up against the back wall with a green piece of satin on it, and a small picture of Srila Prabhupada, small frame picture, and a small frame picture of the Panchatattva, and that was it.
So what was it like meeting Vishnu Janaswami? He must have seemed like a very unusual personality.
It was amazing. We had a teacher who was teaching us Hatha Yoga, who actually was reading to us from Krishna book, and he also had a harmonium, and he would play Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda. That little ashram kind of fell apart, but before it fell apart, this teacher had invited Vishnu Janaswami to come and teach us a little bit, an aspect of yoga called Bhakti Yoga. But before Vishnu Janaswami could come, this ashram split up. And so a couple of us felt impelled to go over to the Hare Krishna temple, bring the harmonium, and tell Vishnu Janaswami not to come to that meeting because there'd be nobody there. And Vishnu Janaswami just immediately began to tell us about Bhagavad Gita. which I was interested in. I had a Bhagavad Gita at the time.
And so you went on, what was your path to getting initiated in?
Well, I stayed in Austin for a while. Vishnujana Swami was our father, friend, mother, Kirtaniya, Kirtan leader, Sankirtan leader. He was every cook. He was everything. So I stayed there for a while. He left and went on to San Antonio, opened a temple there, a preaching center, and then went on to found the roadshow with Kirtanananda Maharaj. I was there in Austin for a while, and then I went on to, well, back up a little bit. Before I joined, my sculpture teacher and I took a Greyhound bus from Austin to New York City, where Prabhupada was giving initiations in 1971 in July, and Henry Street. And we went inside, and there was other devotees there that knew us from Austin, and they told Srila Prabhupada that there's a professor that had come from Austin. And so Prabhupada wanted to meet us. And so we got darshan of Prabhupada practically as soon as we landed in New York.
Wow.
And he asked us both if we could make Panchatattva deities. And we said we could try. You know, we weren't really figurative artists. We were doing these abstract pieces of art. And so when I came back to Austin, I joined the temple, and we already had a studio. And so I would go to the studio and work on these Panchatattva deities. So I finally left. I went to Dallas. Prabhupada came to Dallas for the first time, and he saw what we'd done. And he was very encouraging. And then we both ended up going out to Los Angeles. And we finally made a group of deities, Panchatattva deities out there. But Prabhupada told us at that time that if we really wanted to learn about making murtis, that we should go to India. And so that's when our whole India adventure began.
So had he, was Bardraj Prabhu involved with you at that time, or you met him later?
I had met Bardraj in New York, but I can't say I knew him, we just met. But when we landed in India, like a week and a half later, Bardraj came with his wife Rukmini. And he had also been asked by Srila Prabhupada to come to India to learn this art of clay doll making, which, I mean, we think of dolls in America as little dolls that you buy at a toy store, but these were life-size and bigger than life-size sculptures that were done and had been done for hundreds of years using very basic elements like bamboo for armatures and straw for an under structure and different coatings of clay that ended up making very smooth, beautiful, transcendental figures. And
excuse me, can I
Prabhupada had already, go ahead.
I was just wondering if Sri Rupa can show any of the first few pictures. There's one of.
Yeah, there you go. Right. Yeah, that's a good picture, right?
So underneath that clay, there's a base of straw and bamboo and.
Right. There's on top of the straw is a type of very sticky clay that has rice husks mixed in with it. And that dries on the straw and stays there. Then over that is smeared this very smooth clay, sandy clay that we got from another part of the Ganges. And we could take a cloth and polish it to where it was as shiny as an automobile.
Wow.
The heads were made separately, and they were, yeah, there's the straw. And they were put on the figures after these coats of clay were put on. And then the hands, the fingers, the feet, the details were added on later.
Yeah, I read that kind of humorous statement by Bardraj, where he said that when he first met Prabhupada, he was talking about the Prabhupads. He was mostly a painting artist, and he was in Brooklyn, where there was a ISKCON press at the time.
Right.
And he said that Prabhupada suddenly started talking about dolls.
Right.
And, in America, we have the image of Ken and Barbie and that type of doll. And
right. Yeah.
So he described himself as a real artiste. And it took him a little while to understand what Prabhupada was describing. But he finally embraced it as the order of his spiritual master. Right.
And a means to employ many other people with other skills to come together and use those skills in Krishna's service to create these wonderful displays. Yeah, yeah.
Now, maybe you could backtrack a little bit. This is a letter that Srila Prabhupada wrote to you. Can you read the letter, Sri Rupa?
In London, there is a museum, Madame Tussauds Wax Museum, and people are lined up for blocks just to see some mundane dead bodies. You should go to India and learn how to make dolls. Then we will have our own museum, and simply by seeing our exhibits, people will make spiritual advancement.
Yeah.
Now, to backtrack a little bit, Prabhupada's spiritual master, Bhakti Sadanta Saraswati Thakur, had done quite extensive work with dioramas in India. Is that right? Can you describe?
Yeah. Well, he had doll makers making all these displays, and they had kind of a traveling roadshow. They would go from town to town, and not only displays, there was theater, there was songs, there was dance, there was just all kinds of things. Bhakti Sadanta was so expert at attracting people just to come in to that atmosphere and take prasadam, be entertained, ask questions, come in contact with devotees, take some literature, like that. He created quite a stir. And I've read about these exhibits that he had, especially in Eastern Bengal and Dhaka. And even his sannyasis would come and they would collect money and give him to Bhakti Sadanta, and he would say, go out and get more money. I've spent this money on dolls. And he would make these quite ornate, wonderful exhibits that would travel here and there.
I'm thinking that our philosophy is personalism, that God has form and color and shape and a smile on his face sometimes. And, so making sculpture or art with forms of the Lord and his devotees it seems like the height of personalism, which was the mission of Bhakti Sadanta and Srila Prabhupada.
Right, sure. Well, and it engages us, and just to be in contact with those forms and just that meditation of, how will that arm go? How will that leg go? How will they be dressed? How will they be jeweled? How will they be wigged? How will they be painted? How, what setting are we going to put them in? I mean, it's a whole meditation. You're walking into their world.
Yeah,
it was a wonderful experience.
So you got that letter from Srila Prabhupada, and
yeah, right.
How
We
many
had
other?
no idea how we were going to go to India, but somehow or other we got tickets and we went to Mayapur.
You were in Mayapur for quite a while, and I read how Bardraj got sick a few times and then went to visit Srila Prabhupada in Mumbai. And Prabhupada kept encouraging. There were times when he was, even though he was excited, there were times when he found it difficult. You know, being in India was austere in those days, but somehow Prabhupada kept encouraging everyone. And can you describe what happened in Vrindavan?
Sure. Well, we had made some exhibits for Prabhupada to see in Mayapur, and he'd seen them at the Gaur Purnima festival. I believe that was in 1974. But he said we weren't good enough yet. We needed to practice a little bit more. And so we hired another teacher, and we worked there in Mayapur for a while. And then Guru Das came from Vrindavan and invited us to come there to Vrindavan and make some dolls, some gopis, and for the temple there in Vrindavan. And so we took a train to Vrindavan and we worked there. Prabhupada was there, but Prabhupada fell ill at a certain point. And it was close to the time that we were finishing these, the Astasakis, the 8 chief gopis. And Prabhupada fell ill and Bardraj fell ill. And so at a certain point, Bardraj had malaria, and he could sit up and paint and finish for a little while, and then he'd get a fever and he couldn't move. And we were both living in this little tiny hut on the property. And Prabhupada felt better one day. He went out for a walk. We snuck in all these finished dolls into his room so that when he came back for his morning walk, he would be surprised to see these gopis waiting for him. And sure enough, he was, and he loved it. And he wanted to see us. But at that point, Bardraj was sick. And so I was holding back in that same little hut. And so Prabhupada came and saw us. And so he came into this tiny hut. I mean, we're sitting almost knee to knee. And Prabhupada talked to us and encouraged us and told us to go back to the West, that we'd learned what we needed to learn, and, make a museum that explained the philosophy of Krishna consciousness. So we didn't know where we were going to go. Prabhupada asked different leaders who would take us. And Jayatirtha said, come to LA. I'll help. I'll do whatever needs to be done to create this mission. So we did. We went to Los Angeles and began there, sort of put the word out. Anyone with any desire to learn this art of puto, please come to Los Angeles. And we rented a little studio, and people came from far and wide. My wife came all the way from New York, and devotees came from here and there, and we started training them. And some of them had some experience with sculpture or painting or pottery or some facet of art. And we trained them, and a lot of them blossomed into great sculptors that created wonderful things. Lochan was there. We went and visited with him. He was working for Madame Tussauds wax museum that was opening in LA.
Wow.
And he was working on 2 figures at that time. And we asked him, begged him, pleaded with him to come help us, and he did. And so he came and worked on many different facets of the museum, but he did do that one-seated Prabhupada, that riding Prabhupada, and then later did the Prabhupada Murtis that we know so well all over the world.
Wow. So did you meet your wife in the midst of that project?
We did. She came and she wanted to learn, and we had gone through a whole kind of a training program, but we had her making molds for a while, and then she started doing architectural pieces, and then she started making dolls too. So yeah. We met right there and worked together about 3 years before we got married.
So, like we know Prabhupada emphasized book distribution so much, but many of us have not heard the story of now the dioramas in Los Angeles became quite sophisticated electronically also. Can you discuss? Some of them
Sure.
had amazing lighting and...
Well, we needed a system that could control lights, sound, slide projectors, rear projections on screens, all these different things. And at that point in time, there wasn't a system, there wasn't a computer compatible with that. But we did have a devotee named Amiyatma Das, who was a sort of a hobbyist electrician. And he began working on this system, which later ran the entire LA Museum. And so he was working on that. He had a couple of people helping him. And we had many different talented people show up and help.
I think this is after all that, but I think in the current temple in New Delhi, they have some electronic diorama type programs that they show. Are you familiar with that?
A little bit. My wife and I went through the Delhi Museum. There was one part of the museum that wasn't working, wasn't functioning at the time. And that may have had some robotic figures in it, which I didn't see. But we did see the rest of the museum, and it was beautiful, just wonderful. And even better was standing outside in the afternoons, and these buses of students would come up, and they would stand in lines, and each one of them would get a Bhagavad Gita, and they'd go through the museum. It was just amazing.
Wow.
Really inspiring.
It's sort of, it's a very sophisticated way to preach. And in the one sense, I'm thinking of Prabhupada's wisdom in the book distribution, because a book doesn't require, electronic setup. And I guess it's really unimaginable to think of Bhakti Sadanta as a sannyasi, very renounced from the world, but engaging so much of Krishna, the material energy in Krishna's service through his, and I guess this is Yukta Vairagya and
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think it was, just genius of him to create a situation that people would flock to, and they would walk away with nuggets of gold, bits of philosophy, a good feeling about devotees, chanting the holy names, prasadam, just a way for people to experience Krishna consciousness and to put that into their memory, just like Prabhupada's books. I mean, who was creating and publishing books on philosophy with fully illustrated with these beautiful paintings? Nobody was doing that before Prabhupada.
yeah.
But the result of it was that millions of those books went out. So similarly, Bhakti Sadanta was doing the same thing with these displays that he took all over India.
Yeah, Srila Prabhupada really had the mood of Bhakti Siddhanta, like so many of his godbrothers in the Gaudiya Math, established temples and, but Srila Prabhupada, besides going all around the world, which few, if any of them did, he, he was very forward thinking in terms of the artwork. Like he got George Harrison to donate for
Right.
that Krishna book that he had
Yeah.
printed in Japan.
Right.
And it was really revolutionary. I mean, I've seen cloth bound books from Gita Press in India, a major religious publisher. They were very valuable books, but they didn't have the cover and the artwork. And I mean, Prabhupada was totally ahead of his time. And
no, I mean, it's amazing that he came from India, he came to America, and then he presented something that Americans would just love, you know? Yeah, it's really amazing, really amazing. And I tell you, I have to offer my respects to Bardraj for his vision of the museum. He was so visionary, and you know the ideas that he came up with of bouncing things off mirrors and rear projection and slideshows over these exhibits and creating soundtracks for them and music for them. It really utilized a lot of media, but this is what people are used to. This is what, you know, you go to Disneyland now, you know, and you see, oh, these multimedia shows, and people just eat it up. And so Prabhupada saw that at Madame Tussauds, and he thought, oh, that's what we're going to do, you know?
did Srila Prabhupada actually go inside and see the figures there, or he just heard about it?
He went over to our studio and saw a number of the exhibits in the works, finished or close to finished. And then he also, yeah, there you go. And then he went into the museum, which was a construction site at the time, but we had created a model of what that museum was going to look like and shown it to him previously, and he had blessed us to do it. And so, yeah, in a way, he did go. And then there was a Rath Yatra, the first LA Rath Yatra. We brought a full-size Changing Bodies exhibit and put it in a tent at the Rath Yatra. And there was a line of people, you know, half a mile long to see it. And those pictures were shown to Srila Prabhupada in India. And he looked at Tamal Krishna Maharaj and said, I told you this would happen. And so Prabhupada had the vision, you know, for sure.
Sri Rupa, there's one picture of Bardraj and Adideva working on the Changing Bodies display. I think it's one of the, yes. So I think a number of our viewers have seen the Festival of India, and I would say the most notable thing for newcomers when they go to the Festival of India is see this amazing life-size Changing Bodies. You can see the faces they're working on are as big as their own faces. So it's this amazing Changing Bodies, which gets people halfway to believing in reincarnation within 30 seconds of seeing this display. So it's been some years since we've had this in Houston, but this Festival of India setup has a Changing Bodies display, and it travels mostly in the summertime months all around America with their big festivals and sets up displays. And it's actually happening in El Paso tomorrow, a Rath Yatra that your godbrother Chaitanya Chandraprabhu from Dallas is arranging a big Rath Yatra in El Paso.
Yeah, I heard. That's wonderful. That's so nice. So the Mayapuris from here are going there to chant.
Yeah.
So that would be sweet too.
So when I think of you, by Prabhupada's mercy, he engaged you in your proclivity for art in a wonderful way. And you, as a disciple, you did your part by accepting his offer to engage you. And I think that it's very special that all these people that are going to go to El Paso and see this changing bodies display will owe something to you for your role in making that, and it must be that you'll get some spiritual credit, like they say, like in the, what is it, multi-level marketing, you know, like
Yeah, right.
that you help make that display, and it's bringing so many people closer to Krishna. So we all owe a lot to you and the other artists, and mainly to Srila Prabhupada.
It was, the whole thing was an adventure, you know, it was just an amazing adventure. And that was the push was, Prabhupada wants this, so let's do it, you know, just whatever it takes, let's do it. And, you know, during the Chaitanya Charitamrita marathon that was going on across the street, we were over in the doll studio on the other side of Venice Boulevard. Wow. And we had our own nonstop marathon trying to finish this exhibit for Srila Prabhupada to see, you know. So it was just, I mean, you could go in at any time of the night or day and somebody be doing something in there, you know. And it was great. It was magic.
It sounded like everything was lined up for, you know, a very special time. Like when you talk about mundane artists like Michelangelo had the Medici family, which, you know, helped him, his dreams, his creative genius to flourish and come out with Prabhupada's blessings. Everything seemed to line up for some amazing things to happen.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, no doubt. Right.
So can you say something about what happened in Detroit after that?
Well, before we left Los Angeles, Srila Prabhupada had engaged Ambarish in helping us financially, because Ambarish had wanted to have an exhibit or two, some exhibits in Detroit at the Fisher Mansion, the Fisher Estate, and Deva Sadan Mandir. And so we made some...
you should say that...
Go ahead.
We just say that Ambarish is the great-grandson of Henry Ford, right?
Right, yes. And so we made some exhibits, and at a certain point, we closed down things in LA and we moved our operation to Detroit. And we were there for what, 2.5 years, I believe, working on exhibits there, both outdoors and indoors. We had some exhibits that went out and outside underneath gazebos, and had some exhibits inside. They're all past. We had a Changing Bodies exhibit, the first exhibit people saw. But then we had Lord Krishna's pastimes throughout the rest of the exhibit. And that was very nicely received. The opening had many magazines and newspaper reporters there reporting on this revitalizing of the Fisher Mansion, as well as a revitalizing of the whole city of Detroit at the time. The Renaissance Center had just opened. So there's this whole flourish of energy going into Detroit. And so, yeah, we had people coming, and we took tours through, not only through the exhibits, but outside through the gardens, and also through the mansion itself. And there was a writing Prabhupada that was in Prabhupada's room. And so they got to see that as well. And yeah, there's even paintings by the painters for the books that were shipped from LA and exhibited there on the walls. It was really nice.
And in later years, you you became a professional artist yourself, but in your spare time or part of your time, you kept making some individual diorama pieces. I think Lord, Sri Rupa can show us some of these, like the fish out of water and.
Well, this was the hot rod of the body. It's hard to see, but there's two figures in it. And there's this car that's kind of personified as the different senses of the body. The steering wheel is like the mind. The driver is like the intelligence. And you can see that screaming figure in the back. That's the soul being carried on this bumpy ride of the uncontrolled senses. So that was, just one of the exhibits that I made. These were to take around to college campuses and also to Rath Yatra festivals in New York, in Philadelphia, and in Florida.
Are a few of these still available for a temple to get for their own local?
There's a few, yeah, few are left. I've made copies of some of them, and there's one set that travels with the Festival of India. And then various temples have gotten smaller changing bodies. Yeah.
Lord, Sri Rupa, can you show some more?
Yeah, that's the frog in the well. He just can't understand or believe that there's a bigger body of water anywhere except inside of his well.
So it's like someone that can't understand the inconceivable nature of
right, the
God.
Descending knowledge. And this is the bird cage. Unfortunately, that bird is not being fed or being well taken care of, but the cage is being polished by this lady who can't, for some reason, understand that nourishing the cage is not nourishing the bird. So the analogy is we need to nourish our spirit as well as maintain our body, but we shouldn't put all our emphasis into the body. And that's a fish out of water. That this poor fish, she's got necklaces, tiaras, sports cars, food, drink, money, everything money can buy, but not satisfied, not happy, not where she should be. Fish out of water. This is an exhibit that twirls around. On one side is this fella who's has this kind of an animal mentality. And I don't know if there's a photograph of the other side of it. Yeah. Just showing the results of animal slaughter and meat eating, what it does to the consciousness. And so these are exhibits that are maybe a little more in your face, you might say, just to kind of get some kind of a reaction, something that people can pick up quickly, and hopefully that image will stick for a while and they'll think about it, ruminate on it, perhaps change their ways. This is the famous two birds in a forest. One bird is eating the fruits of the tree. That's the jiva soul living in the material world. And right behind him is the super soul waiting patiently for the jiva soul to turn to the super soul. And this is
really in your face.
Yeah. Yeah, well, this is the cow butcherer. And there's a face of a cow on the man's, where the man's face is, and the man's face on the cow's face, just they kind of switch. And yeah, that piece has gotten a lot of controversy and has led to a lot of conversations, which have been very good because it educates people about karma and karmic reaction.
Gets people thinking for sure.
Yeah. And this was, we had a series of reliefs, and this was one I did of the changing bodies again, but it was framed, and all these could be stacked in the back of my van, and I could take it from here to New York City and park it close to Washington Square Park and set this up along with the Festival of India. They would give us a tent. And from the time we set it up at about 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning till the sun went down, we would have people there to talk to. I mean, it was just amazing.
Yeah, I saw you there one year.
This is another exhibit I did of lust, anger, and greed on one side and the Bhagavad Gita on the other side. And the fellow in between is kind of two-faced. He's looking at being drawn to lust, anger, and greed, one part of his self, and the other side of his self is looking for transcendental knowledge, which he's finding there in the Bhagavad Gita.
Beautiful. Is there a caption to something like that? Or
yeah, all these have captions, and we wrote them big and put them on laminated cards in front of each one. So that even if we couldn't, because we get off talking to somebody and there'd be this crowd of people looking at the exhibits, and we wanted to have some kind of a sequence explaining each one and giving a philosophical explanation of what they were looking at visually.
So Srila Prabhupada talked about cultural conquest. Can you talk about Prabhupada as a trying to conquer the Western materialistic society by spiritual culture?
Well, he called us, what was it? Cultural weapons, he said. That people, by seeing these, will take that image into their consciousness, and it will create in them questions that only the Hare Krishna movement can answer. I mean, we've got the Bhagavad Gita, we've got Srimad Bhagavatam, we've got the Chaitanya Charitamrita, and we have so many devotees, learned devotees, that can give information to people about the nature of the soul, nature of the spirit, the nature of that part of us that's eternal, that doesn't change as the body changes. And so Prabhupada was very adamant and strong about this from the beginning, because I mean, Jadharani hadn't been in the temple more than a week or so when Prabhupada engaged her in painting. And from that came all of our illustrated books. And so similarly, Prabhupada wanted that to happen with the dioramas. He wanted plays that would travel all over the world, players, theater, music, just, you know, everything Krishnized, you know. Prabhupada wasn't afraid of Krishnizing anything. And he showed us the way, inspired us, and kept inspiring us. He would come to our studios whenever he was in, wherever we were, and see what we were doing and ask questions and critique our work. And, you know, so we're very fortunate, super fortunate.
A lot of devotees didn't have quite as much contact with Prabhupada personally as you happen to have through that work that you did. So you are very fortunate. You got a lot of association with Srila Prabhupada.
Well, I mean, I was just a kid from Texas, who happened to be, I think of kind of like the long arm of the law. Well, this is the long arm of the Sampradaya to put Vishnu Jana Swami in Austin, Texas, of all places, And I was lucky enough to meet him and be, my life completely changed at that point, And so I just, I took what I'd learned, and Prabhupada taught me so much more, I mean, I was not a figurative sculptor. I worked with clay a little bit, but I was not a figurative sculptor. And
you
by
did modern
working,
art.
Hmm?
You did modern
Yeah.
art.
Yeah, I did. I was working in steel and clay and wood and different other things. And my teacher was working in carved stone. And it's very different, type of art form. But Prabhupada saw something in us and encouraged us. He fanned that spark. And by fanning that spark, we became more and more engaged. And then he could actually place us in a position where we could be trained properly. And then we could be helpful in spreading his movement.
Maybe we could ask if any of our people on the meeting would like to comment or ask any questions to Adideva. From my own side, I'd like to know what displays are still available and how heavy they are to, set up and carry around.
Well, all the the smaller displays I have are done in fiberglass. We worked in clay, we worked in straw. The entire Los Angeles Museum is in the traditional medium that we learned in India.
Wow.
But once we decided to do an exhibit in Detroit, by that time we learned how to make molds and how to work with sort of modern materials like fiberglass resins and stuff, to where we could make displays that were lightweight and sturdy, where they could be shipped and used in different ways. The clay pieces that are in the LA Museum are very fragile. It's unfired clay.
Yeah.
And they're all behind glass encasements. But these exhibits that I have made are all done in fiberglass. I mean, they're done the traditional way, and then I make a mold and cast them in fiberglass and paint them. And so they're all lightweight. They can all be moved around easily. And most of them, I think, are in like frames. They're like reliefs that can be stacked, so they're even easier to move around. So for the,
I'll talk to you separately sometime, and we go to the universities around Houston.
Right.
And
yeah, we've taken them to many universities. We put them right in front of the Bhakti Center in New York City. I put one of the changing bodies in 26 Second Avenue. I think it's still there. And, when we were in front of the Bhakti Center, people, it's just crowded, and people would stop and talk and, created quite a scene. It was fun. And so, yeah, that's kind of our commando mission, putting these things out there, let people see them, and we're there to answer questions if they want, or we can give them some literature, and they can go around and go back and think about it and come back or whatever,
I think of you, and I think of my brother, who was also a very talented artist. But you were fortunate to use your art in Krishna's service. And my brother, he got melanoma, cancer of the skin, and he got chemotherapy, and his hair fell out. He became bald, and he kind of joked to my mother, "Look, I wasn't planning to become a Hare Krishna, but here I am, close to leaving this body, and
Right.
my head is like the Hare Krishna's head."
Well, they had your association. That's good.
So I'm hoping that he took a birth in a devotee family, and he might use his art like you have used your art in such a wonderful way.
Yeah.
Anybody else have any comments they'd like to make? Or
Hare Krishna, I have a question. Did it ever spark any heated arguments, some of the art that you had? Just curious.
No, not really. I mean, people question, and they will offer some question, or they decide that's really crazy, and what are you talking about? But I remember there was one fellow in St. Augustine. We had a setup after a Rath Yatra there. And he came tromping up, and he had the boots, and he had the motorcycle jacket, and he had the long hair and tattoos and lots of metal in his face. And he walked around to all the different exhibits, and he walked up to that piece that we showed with the cow and the butcher, and he stood there for about 5 minutes, and I approached him, and he turned around to me and he said, that's the best exhibit here.
mm-hmm.
So hopefully that image is emblazoned in his mind and softens his heart, so that at some point he can, learn more.
Yeah, I would like to get that, but I think it's not available right now, right?
No, not right now.
Maybe I'll talk to you separately about what you do have. And
yeah. Well, we plan to drive to Houston at some point in the near future, so we should talk.
Yeah, well, maybe you could bring something if we talk ahead of time.
Yeah.
People are quite, like, we go to the college, and it seems like there's not like born again Christians who are in your face. I think the world is more multicultural than it was. So I think that a lot of people are open-minded and impressionable.
I think so. Well, I think America is more multicultural than when you and I were growing up. And people are just, they're open to new ideas, new kinds of food, new ways of entertainment. And, maybe COVID's been a blessing, because I think a lot of people have, all glories to the internet, and they have maybe learned about different other cultures and different places in the world, and they appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of work to do, and but Prabhupada gave us a lot of leadership, and we have to just do our part. Does Guru Bhakti have anything to add?
Yes, Prabhu. I wanted to tell you that the changing bodies, not the changing bodies, but the karma exhibit is really drew a lot of attention when we had our festivals.
Oh.
And would it be okay to ask you about your daughters? They have a band, which they had a band called Prince Rama.
Right.
And maybe you could tell us a little about that, because I think most people don't know.
Well, our daughters are very musical. And for some time, for about 10 years, beginning when we moved here to Alachua, they founded a band, and they used it as a stepping off point to where some of the music was mantras, and they had different lyrics that were spiritually inclined. And they were very fortunate. They got to travel. They traveled and played all over the world. And they've since, the band is broken up. One of my daughters is in Austin right now, and the other daughter's in upstate New York. And the girl that's in upstate New York, Tarika, she is putting together another album, and she's working on a solo career. But yeah, they named the band. First, it was Prince Rama of Ayodhya, and that was a little hard for people to, carry around their heads. And so they shortened it to Prince Rama. And just because of that, I mean, Tarika has a whole fan base of people that follow her. And I can remember going to shows. My wife and I, whenever they were close, we would go to their shows. And the people that were waiting for Prince Rama to come on stage, there'd be this whole chant, Rama, 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 Rama. And so that was good. And my wife would make cookies and fudge. And that was, everybody knew that if my wife was there, they're going to get cookies and fudge. And so that was just part of the program. And so anyway, they got a little prasadam, and yeah, it's real sweet.
Thank you.
Sure. Nice seeing you.
I'm hoping you'll come to Houston, and hopefully we can set up something for your displays. That would be really cool. Once this COVID is over, and there's so many venues here, and it'll be really nice to have you back here.
We haven't been able to travel hardly at all. Mm-hmm. But yeah, we'll see. We'll see what the future brings.
I was wondering, have you ever, we have this big art festival in Houston called the Bayou City Art Festival.
Right.
Yeah. Have you ever? You exhibited in? Okay, nice. When was that? Yeah.
No, I exhibited my commercial work in that for years. And but I've retired. I used to tell. I had a sister-in-law that said, "When are you going to retire?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to get new tires for my van and retire, just kind of keep going." But since the COVID, I've stopped doing shows, and I'm doing a lot of writing now, and I'm doing some illustration. So nice. Just, doing that sort of work.
Wonderful. We used to do prasadam at the Bayou City Art Festival. It was very well received.
Oh, I'm sure it was. Yeah.
In the later years, yeah.
Such a nice show. Yeah, yeah.
Very nice people too.
Yeah, definitely.
So, Prabhu.
Adideva.
Yes, Prabhu, Hare Krishna. So this picture you made is you got that idea by yourself, or somebody give you that idea for this made what type of picture frames and all that?
Utilizing the philosophy of Krishna consciousness and the analogies that Prabhupada would give us, things like the bird, two birds in the tree, utilizing that for the imagery. We wanted something that we could travel with, that would be easy to move from one festival to another. And just putting these things into reliefs and putting them in frames made them easy to transport. And because I don't have a big trailer or anything to pull, nor do I want a big trailer to pull, whatever would fit in my van, that's where it went. So we would cram our van with as much dioramas and artwork as we could, and then go. At the time, we would go up to New York because my daughters lived in Brooklyn, so we had a place to stay. And we could go to the Rath Yatra Festival there. And then later, we made friends with the temple president in Philadelphia, and so he would let us come and do the festival there. And in Florida, we have 6 or 7 Rath Yatras in the major cities of Florida every year. And so this is great for us to get to take these from from city to city to city within the state and exhibit these, exhibit these pieces, and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people would come. So that's been what we've been doing since we moved here. What was it, 2002?
Wow.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
So it's just a practical thing of how to get artwork from A to B without having to rent a huge vehicle, or and we wanted them light so we could transport them easily. Yeah.
Very nice.
Whatever.
Sure.
I think we would be definitely interested in, whatever can be made, it already has molds, and we'll be glad to pay for it. And, we need to do more here. You're from Texas, so.
Deep in the heart.
So let's work together and try to do something on a smaller scale here, on some scale.
Okay, that'd be fun.
Any final comments from anyone before you let?
Prabhu, there's a question in the chat. Neelam would like to know how the speaker got in contact with Prabhupada to start with. I'm guessing maybe you could speak a little bit about your first time, a little bit more.
About meeting Prabhupada?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we had met Vishnujana Swami. Vishnujana Swami had gone out had taken the rest of the Austin temple to San Francisco, to the Rath Yatra there. But I had a job, and my art professor was teaching, and so we couldn't go. And we're all kind of, down in the mouth about that, because they all came back and they're all like fired up. But Vishnujana Swami said, "Do you want to meet Prabhupada?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, he's going to be in New York City, in a week or so, because there's going to be a lot of initiations there that Prabhupada will perform." And so I figured, this is my chance, And so both my professor and I, we went down. I mean, we hadn't even moved in the temple yet. We shaved our heads. His wife made us some bead bags. We went down to some cloth store, and bought some orange cloth, and jumped on a Greyhound bus and went to New York, and took a taxi to Henry Street. And they plopped us off in front of the temple, and we just kind of went in, and we're downstairs eating prasadam. And a devotee that had been in Austin, Subhananda, knew kind of our background, and told Prabhupada's servant that there's a professor here from Texas. And Prabhupada said, "Oh, I want to meet him." And so I was just hanging on, so I just thought, man, I'm going with him, And so we were right outside of Prabhupada's room, and there was a stairway on the left going downstairs. And I guess Prabhupada's servant knew we were there. He said, "Oh, Prabhupada's downstairs. She'll be back in just a minute." And so we're just standing out in this hallway, and all of a sudden I saw the top of Prabhupada's head coming up the steps. And then, we just, offered, and at that point, we didn't even know how to say Nama Om Vishnu Padaya. We just offered obeisances. And Prabhupada smiled, and he invited us into his room, and he sat behind his little table. And we just sat there, and he talked to us for a while. We were just awestruck. And then he asked his servant to go get this drawing of the Panchatattva. And so he showed it to us, and he said, "Do you think you could do these? We need these in our temples all over the world. You think you could do those?" he said, well, we can try. We'll definitely try. And so we stayed in New York for about a week, you know, watched the initiations, and then came back to Texas, and we still had a studio and everything. I moved into the temple, and so then we began, you know. So that was our initial push, you know, by Prabhupada to, you know, learn this art and then use it in Krishna's service.
Who was the professor?
His name was William Walsh. He was initiated Murti Das.
Yes.
He went on to help Surabhi do a lot of the design work for the Bombay temple, as well as in Krishna Balaram. And then he went to South Africa and worked on a temple there. And so he had a degree in architecture and got a master's in sculpture. And so, you know, he had kind of both things going. And so he was utilized in that way.
Okay, maybe we can let you go, but thank you so much. And I'd like to let Sri Rupa end the program.
All right. Well, thank you so much.